Hey everybody, it's Sneaky Panda. So I started my next build. It's another big one. After making a life-size group for the backyard, my wife asked me to make her a life-size Sasquatch, so here we are. I had a friend model the STL for me, and once we had it dialed in, I took it to Lubon and cut it into bite-sized pieces for my printers. This time, when I cut it up, I had the program add dowel holes. These help to align all the pieces, and I liked it a lot better than printing the alignment pieces like I did with group. And of course my wife is cool enough that she has a disco skull in our house. I mean, she's wanting a Bigfoot in the backyard. I tried to connect a couple pieces at a time and then would connect those pieces together. That made it more manageable, especially given the size. For the majority of the connections, I used E6000 as the adhesive. It's my favorite. You do need to allow about 24 hours for it to cure. So for those times that I wanted to move on faster than that, I would use CA glue with accelerator to stabilize the connection until the E6000 set up. When clamps won't work, ratchet straps are the best. You do have to be careful. You can over tighten them and the hooks can dig into the plastic and break it. That's what happened on that part of the leg, but it also happened on the chest. To repair those areas, I used epoxy wood filler, and after mixing it, would sculpt it into those areas to repair the damage and blend it into the surrounding areas. Organic pieces like this can have its advantages to a mechanical looking piece. However, that's not always the case. Trying to hide the seams can be tricky. With a flat piece, I can glob a bunch on and then sand it down. On Sassy here, the fur makes that option not an option. So I tried to shape and sculpt the body filler as I filled the gaps and seams. It worked fairly well, but you will see later on that sometimes it takes several attempts at it to blend a seam. The file had been designed in pieces: the head, the torso, the arms, and the legs, again making it more manageable to assemble. To adhere them together, I used liquid nails, which worked a treat. Everything was a bit unwieldy for one person, so I recruited my son and his friend to help me manhandle, or Bigfoot handle. Once the legs were connected and strapped, I started working on the arms. Have I mentioned how big this guy is? With that size comes accidents. Once I got the left arm stabilized, I was able to check out the damage. Which was all of his fingers pretty much broken. You can see the crack there. Bummer, but oh well. Once I got Bigfoot stable, I was able to use some CA glue with accelerator to fix the broken hand. Strapping is awesome, but sometimes even with straps, you have to move them around to not just get the pressure in the right direction you want, but also in a way that when you're ratcheting, it doesn't slide off. And sometimes you have to try and get multiple angles pulling on a joint, otherwise it may close one side but open the other. You really have to get the positioning, but once you do, you'll have a bonded and secured Bigfoot. Next step was priming with filler primer. After weeks of printing, seriously, this took me almost 6 weeks to print on both of my printers. So after weeks of printing, getting to this step feels like a big leap forward. It's starting to feel like a statue or whatever you call this. After priming, there were still a lot of areas that needed filled, more than the filler primer could handle. In steps Bondo. I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Bondo. It works, but I despise having to mix it. That's why I prefer to use spot putty, but for as much as I needed on Biggie Smalls here, Bondo made a lot more sense. Like before, I applied it liberally and then tried to shape and sculpt the Bondo. It starts to set up pretty quick so you don't have a long working time before it's too firm to manipulate. I believe I printed a Yeti Mr. McGee in 76 pieces, about 20 less than Groot. However, I used almost double the amount of filament. He is a monster. I had already started with my base coat of black, but needed to prime the bottom black as well. I didn't bother with filler primer as it wouldn't be seen. But I needed to somehow wrestle this 10-foot tall, 150-pound behemoth onto its side so that I could paint his underneath parts, or front, his stomach, so I could paint his stomach. I have been using a lot of spray paint with these projects, so I found this file on MakerWorld and printed it to convert my drill to a paint mixer. It's legitness. Once he was painted black, I started dry brushing of burnt umber all over. Then I wanted to add some variation, so I added some cadmium orange and blended it in. However, as I did this, I realized there were some areas that I didn't love, where the seam still needed some tweaking. So I went back and cleaned up some of those areas, and then I did some spots with a black. As I did that, I realized I liked the black spot look of his fur, so I went back and did that throughout all over his body to get an even randomness. Is that a thing, even randomness? Once I moved on his face, I was a little nervous because I had never really painted skin before. Like always, I start with a dark and work my way lighter. So a burnt umber base was then layered with a light gray tan to the higher areas. As I needed, I would blend in the burnt umber to get a nice gradient. As I got closer to the look I wanted, I added darker freckle-like spots of black and dark brown, but would then layer on top of it and go back and forth. It gave it more depth than if I had just spotted the tops with the spots. After painting his eyes and teeth white, I tried to add a little bit of dimension with grays in the crevices and embrasures of his teeth, and a really light pink wash in the corner of his eyes to give a little bit of a blood vessel appearance. I started by adding a very small pupil to help designate where I wanted him to be looking, but then I went back and painted his eyes with a dark blue. I didn't want to do brown, I wanted to do something that would stand up just a little bit more. Once I'd gotten his eyes how I wanted to look, I went back and added very thin dark gray lines to give separation between the teeth. His tongue is looking pretty sad, and everyone knows that Bigfoot does not have a sad tongue. So I started with the base of some gray to give it some dimension, and then I went with a couple washes of red. Initially, it was all too red, so by the end, I ended up making it a little bit darker. The teeth also needed some toning down, as they were way too white. So I decided to do some washes of yellow to kind of just give it a little bit more of a realistic look. At first, it was way too yellow, so then I went back and did some lighter washes of white just to give it a little bit more dimension and less of a Marlboro mouth look. This Bigfoot needed to be just a little bit more gangster, so I added a gold tooth in the front just to add that little level of spice. I used polyurethane for the first time as my sealer. I really like the coat that it gave Bigfoot. I think it will give it a durable finish. But it did leave it with a bit of a yellowish coloring, and it was really shiny, and both of those things I need to address. Because of the extreme shininess and the little bit of yellowness, I wanted to tone those both down. So I brought it down a little bit with a Brillo pad and a light sandpaper. The Brillo pad worked well on the body, but not as good on the face. It left greenish spots on the areas that had thicker sealer. But the sandpaper took too much off too quickly on the fur areas. Eventually, I got it down to a more pleasing matte look. So it was time for a black oil paint wash. This part is always a little unnerving, but you just have to trust the process. And once that was done, Sassy Squatch was ready for the big time. That Sasquatch is done. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts. Also, I'm trying to figure out a name for this guy. So if you have any, go ahead and leave it in the comment. Thanks again for watching. Peace.